Shalom, shalom, shalom to everyone watching. This is Rabbi Moshe Otero with the Ways of Israel, and I want to welcome you this morning to our class on Sefer Haikkarim. We are continuing this series through the books of Rabbi Joseph Albo, Spanish Jewish sage, or you might say even a rabbinical leader of his time, and an incredible mind in the area of philosophy, religion, and a theologian of his time, as well as you'll see that his concept embraces the basics of Judaism in a very fundamental, logical way, which was very normal within the Jews of that time. And we want to go into this because, believe it or not, his writings and his ideas have an effect in today's Judaism in many different areas, including what he comments about the Rambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, known to be one of the leading halakhic posek of our time. And so I wanted to go through Rabbi Albo, who is a predecessor or a rabbi of the time, in which he comments on Rabbi Maimonides, his work of the Mishnah Torah. So we can see two different points of view here, which is very important as we go further. And we're going to go right into chapter 2, which is a brief chapter, but I think we need to go into it one chapter at a time. Now, Rabbi Albo says that there are two kinds of agents. There's one kind that does primarily and essentially only one thing, that like heat, like the heat of a fire, which heat, and cold of snow, which cools. This kind is called natural agent, not voluntary or intentional. Then there is a kind which does contrary things. This is a voluntary agent, which are acts from choice, and it does a thing when it wants to, and then does the opposite when it wants to. Now, it is clearly absurd, says Rabbi Albo, to suppose that the work of God comes from him as from the first kind of agent, for a natural agent is not separated from the act. Thus, we read and understand that the light is not separated from the lamp. Heat is not separated from the fire, but God is something different from the act. Moreover, a natural agent is defective, doing a thing not with consciousness and understanding, but by necessity. Where there is a recipient ready at hand, as fire burns, it is to find the object capable of burning. But that which is necessarily act when the occasion presents itself is defective, since it has no power to refrain from the act to do the opposite. But God cannot have any defect. Therefore his activity cannot be of this kind. But it seems inappropriate that God's works should proceed from him, as far or as from an agent that is of second class. For the term voluntary applies where the agent desires and does a given thing at a given time, which he did not desire before. The term voluntary does not apply to a thing which is always in the same condition. It follows, therefore, that one who has will change from a condition of not willing to a condition of willing. If so, he is affected and receives changes from another, for a thing cannot be active and passive at the same time in the same relation. But God cannot change, nor be affected by another, nor can he be affected by himself, for he would then be composed of two elements, an element by virtue of which he acts, and an element by virtue of which he is acted upon. But there cannot be any composition in God at all, as we shall see, nor can God be active and passive at the same time. It follows, therefore, that God's activity cannot be voluntary, since he cannot change. Moreover, an agent possessed of will lacks the thing which he desires, but God does not lack anything which he desires at any time, and does not have before. Similarly, one who exercises a choice chooses one of two things, because that thing is more suitable to him than the other. He therefore lacks the thing which he chooses before he has chosen it. It follows, therefore, that God's activity cannot be due to choice or will. But if he does not act with choice and will, nor like a natural agent, as light comes from the sun, as we'll explain, how can God be called an agent? I have seen some authority, says Rabbi Albo, that says that God does act with choice and will, by these do not arise in him in time that they do in us, but are eternal. Accordingly, they say, says Rabbi Albo, God created the world when he did and not before, by an eternal will which decreed that the world should come into being when it did. We also find statements of the rabbis indicating that they entertain a similar view, and thus they say God stipulated with the works of creation that the Red Sea should divide, that the fire should not burn Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. From that it seems that their purpose was not to attribute to God a newly originated will at the time of the occurrence of the miracle, and therefore they say that the miracle occurred when it did through an eternal will, which determined that the miracle should take place when it did. But this opinion is far from intelligible. For we examine the expression eternal will, and we find that it is spurious conception and points to the necessity rather than the will. For the question remains as it was originally. When the world was created, or when the miracle occurred, through his eternal will, was it possible for God to postpone it to another time, or not? If he should postpone it, the eternal will was nullified. For this reason, or for the reason he did not postpone it, was not because of the eternal will, but because he did not desire at that moment to postpone it. If he had desired to do so, he would have postponed it. And if it was not possible for him to postpone it because of the eternal will, he had decreed, and then there is no such thing as will anymore. And he becomes an agent acting by necessity and not with will, since he could not postpone the act if he would. We should have to say that the same thing is about all miracles and acts proceeding from him, at any time, that they happen by necessity, and that the thing should not happen, should not help being when it is. For so it has been determined by God's eternal will, which cannot be changed. If this were so, man would be more perfect in his acts than God. For man can do either of the two opposites equally. For example, he can paint the board black or white as he chooses whenever he chooses, whereas God can only do one of two opposites. The one is determined by his eternal will, and heaven forbid that this should be the case. He begins to get involved, Rabbi Alba, into the idea of God's will, God's choosing, and the implications of all of this in chapter 2. We're going to continue with this series with chapter 3, where he begins to understand by the will of the origination of a new state in the agent, which leads him to do something that he did not do before the volition originated. Philosophers have said unseemly things that about God, maintaining that his activity cannot be voluntary, that the opinion is not only upsets all the principles of the Torah completely, for if God does not act with will, he cannot act at one time rather than another, a supposition which leads to the doctrine of eternity, in which absolute senses, and to the rejection of all miracles in the Torah. Prayer ceases to be of any avail in a time of distress, in rightful conduct, in repentance, are useless, and so on. It is also opposed to the demands of rational speculation, for it is the axiom that God must have all perfection, be free from all defects. This is the meaning of the prophets when he says, "Thou art the eyes too pure to behold evil, and thou canst not look on mischief." Seeing that it would be a defect in God to look in mischief, the prophet says that he cannot do so, meaning that nothing should be attributed to God which looks like a defect. And here we will end this portion, which is very powerful as to the aspect of the essence of God and who God is, which we will continue to develop in the thought of Rabbi Albo and his explanation. So stay tuned, continue with us, and support the Ways of Israel, Los Caminos de Israel, with your contributions and with your support. Share this videos with others. Hit the click below and be part of what we're doing. Shalom, shalom. May Hashem bless every one of you who are watching.